The gunshot that shattered Emma Sullivan's leg came from a rustler's rifle during a cattle raid 3 years ago, and the town doctor had been too drunk to set the bone properly. She walked now with a pronounced limp, her right leg dragging slightly with each step, a permanent reminder of that terrible night when her father's ranch had been attacked and he had died defending his herd. At 22 years old, Emma had learned to live with the stares and whispers in El Dorado, Kansas. But she had never learned to stop the ache in her heart that came with being different, with being broken in a place where strength meant everything. Yates Lawson noticed her the moment she stepped onto the wooden sidewalk outside the general store, her arms laden with supplies, her dark hair escaping from beneath her worn bonnet. He had been in town for 3 days, hired by the Cattlemen's Association to track down a gang of horse thieves that had been plaguing the county, and in those 3 days he had seen her twice before. Both times he had watched people step around her, their eyes sliding away from her uneven gait, their discomfort palpable. It made something twist in his chest, something he had not felt in the 5 years since he had started drifting from town to town, taking whatever work came his way. When Emma stumbled on the top step, her packages beginning to slip, Yates moved without thinking. His long stride brought him to her side in seconds, his hands catching the falling parcels before they could hit the ground. Emma looked up, startled, her green eyes wide with surprise and something else, something that looked like embarrassment. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. "I thought I had them balanced better than that." "Looks like you bought out half the store," Yates said, and he was surprised to hear the warmth in his own voice. He was not usually one for conversation, preferring the silence of the open range to the complications of human interaction. But there was something about this woman, something in the way she held herself despite the obvious difficulty of her walk, that drew him in. "My ranch does not run itself," Emma replied, a hint of pride creeping into her tone, "though sometimes I wish it did." Yates adjusted the parcels in his arms. "Where are you headed? I can help you carry these." He saw the hesitation flash across her face, the automatic refusal forming on her lips. People probably offered help out of pity, he realized, and she had learned to decline. But then she looked down at the remaining packages in her own arms, at the long dirt road that stretched ahead, and he saw her practical nature win out over her pride. "The Sullivan Ranch," she said. "It is about 2 miles west of town, but you do not have to come all that way. If you could just help me get these to my wagon." "I have got time," Yates said, and he meant it. "The horse thieves could wait another hour. Besides, my horse could use the exercise." They walked together down the main street of El Dorado, and Yates found himself naturally slowing his pace to match hers. It was not a conscious decision at first, just an instinct, but when he saw the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, the way the tension eased from her jaw, he knew it had been the right thing to do. Most people either rushed ahead, leaving her to struggle along behind, or walked painfully slowly, making a show of their patience. Yates simply walked beside her, his longer legs adjusting to her rhythm as naturally as breathing. "You are new in town," Emma said after a moment. It was not a question. "Passing through," Yates confirmed, "working for the Cattlemen's Association." "The horse thieves," Emma nodded. "Everyone has been talking about them. They hit the Morrison place last week, took 6 of their best breeding stock. I heard." Yates kept his voice neutral, but he was already cataloging information the way he always did. "You have trouble with them at your place?" Emma shook her head. "I do not have horses worth stealing. Just a few work animals, old and stubborn. The thieves want young stock they can sell for good money." They reached her wagon, a sturdy but aging buckboard with faded paint and one wheel that looked like it needed replacing soon. Yates loaded the supplies into the back, making sure everything was secure. Emma climbed up onto the seat with practiced ease, though he noticed how she favored her left leg, using it to do most of the work while her right leg followed reluctantly. "Thank you again," she said, gathering the reins in her capable hands. "That was kind of you." Yates found himself not wanting the conversation to end. "I meant what I said about the ride out to your place, if you do not mind the company." Emma studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she smiled, just a little. "I do not mind. Though I should warn you it is not much to look at. The ranch has seen better days." Yates retrieved his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Ranger, from the hitching post outside the saloon and swung into the saddle. He kept pace with the wagon as they left town, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. The Kansas prairie stretched out around them, endless grass rippling in the wind like a golden ocean. "How long have you been running the ranch alone?" Yates asked. "3 years," Emma said, her eyes on the road ahead. "Since my father died. He was killed the same night I got this." She gestured to her leg without looking down. "Rustlers hit us at midnight, we fought back. He paid with his life, I paid with my leg." The matter-of-fact way she said it made Yates' chest tighten. "I am sorry. So am I." Emma was quiet for a moment, then continued. "The doctor was supposed to set the bone, but he had been drinking. He did his best, I suppose, but it was not good enough. By the time I realized it had healed wrong, it was too late to break it again and reset it. So I limp. Could be worse. Could be dead." "That is a hard way to look at it." "It is the only way to look at it," Emma said firmly. "I have a ranch to run, cattle to tend, a life to live. Feeling sorry for myself would not change anything, so I do not waste time on it." Yates respected that. He had met plenty of people who let smaller setbacks define them, who wore their wounds like badges and expected the world to accommodate their pain. Emma Sullivan was not one of them. She had taken what life had dealt her and kept moving forward, even if that forward motion was slower and more difficult than it had been before. The Sullivan Ranch appeared on the horizon, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a central yard. The house was small but sturdy, built of wood that had been whitewashed once but now showed mostly bare gray planks. The barn was larger, its red paint faded to rust, with a corral attached that currently held half a dozen cattle and 2 horses. Fields stretched out beyond, planted with corn and wheat, though Yates could see even from a distance that the crops needed attention. "Like I said, not much to look at," Emma said as she pulled the wagon to a stop near the house. "But it is mine." Yates dismounted and began unloading the supplies, carrying them into the house when Emma directed him. The interior was clean and simply furnished, everything worn but well cared for. He could see evidence of her father everywhere, a pipe on the mantel, boots by the door that were too large for Emma's feet, a jacket hanging on a peg that no one had been able to bring themselves to move. It made the house feel both lived in and empty at the same time, occupied by one person and the ghost of another. "Can I offer you coffee?" Emma asked once everything was unloaded. "It is the least I can do after you helped me." Yates knew he should decline, should get back to his work, but he found himself nodding. Coffee would be good. They sat at the kitchen table, sturdy oak that had probably been built by Emma's father or grandfather, and drank coffee from chipped ceramic mugs. The silence between them was comfortable, neither feeling the need to fill it with unnecessary words. Outside, the wind rattled the windows and carried the smell of growing things. "What made you become a tracker?" Emma asked finally. Yates considered the question. "I was good at it. After the war, I needed work. Tracking paid better than most things, and I liked being outside, not stuck in some town or city. The war, Emma nodded slowly. You fought. Everyone fought one way or another. Yates did not elaborate, and Emma did not push. The war had ended 11 years ago in 1865, but its shadows still stretched long across the land. Men like Yates, who had been old enough to fight, carried those shadows with them wherever they went. You have family? Emma asked. Had a brother. He died at Shiloh. Parents passed a few years after the war ended. No one else. Yates met her eyes across the table. You, just me now. My mother died when I was 12. It was always just me and my father after that. We made a good team. Her voice softened. I miss him every day. They talked as the afternoon faded into evening, the conversation flowing more easily than Yates would have expected. Emma told him about the ranch, about the struggles of keeping it running without help, about the cattle that needed moving to summer pasture, and the fence line that needed repairs, and the roof that leaked when it rained. Yates found himself offering to help, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. I could fix that roof, he said, and check your fence line. I have got some time before I need to move on the horse thieves. Emma looked at him skeptically. Why would you do that? Because you need the help, and because I want to. I cannot pay you much. Did I ask for payment? Emma frowned, but he could see she was considering it. I do not take charity. It is not charity. It is help from one person to another. You would do the same if positions were reversed. That seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly. All right, but I insist on feeding you while you work, and if you need a place to stay, there is a bunk in the barn. It is not fancy, but it is dry. That was how Yates Lawson ended up spending the next 2 weeks at the Sullivan ranch. He fixed the roof, mending the shingles that had blown loose and replacing others that had rotted through. He rode the fence line, repairing breaks and reinforcing weak sections. He helped Emma move her cattle to better grazing land, and he broke up the fights when her old bull got ornery. In the evenings, they ate dinner together at that oak table, and they talked about everything and nothing. Yates learned that Emma loved to read but rarely had time for it anymore. He learned that she had wanted to be a teacher before her father died, but the ranch had needed her more. He learned that she sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs, her voice clear and true. He learned that she was lonely but would never admit it, that she was proud but not stubborn, that she was kind even when kindness had not been shown to her. Emma learned that Yates had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. She learned that he was patient with animals and good with his hands, able to fix almost anything given enough time. She learned that he read poetry, which surprised her until he explained that his mother had been a schoolteacher before the war and had insisted all her sons be educated. She learned that he was haunted by things he would not speak about, nightmares that sometimes woke him in the dark hours before dawn. She learned that he was gentle in ways that had nothing to do with softness, and strong in ways that had nothing to do with force. And every time they walked together, whether it was across the yard or out to check the cattle or into town for more supplies, Yates slowed his pace to match hers. He never mentioned it, never made a show of it. He simply walked beside her, his long legs adapting to her rhythm, and Emma felt something inside her chest begin to unknot, some tight, painful thing she had been carrying since the night her leg had been broken and her father had died. On the 15th day, Emma found Yates in the barn, grooming Ranger with long, careful strokes. She watched him for a moment from the doorway, the afternoon light slanting through the gaps in the walls and turning the dust motes to gold. He had taken off his shirt because of the heat, and she could see the scars that crossed his back, old wounds from the war. He had survived things she could only imagine, carried his own pain in silence, and yet he had taken the time to slow down for her. "Yates," she said quietly. He turned, and the expression on his face when he saw her made her heart skip. It was open, unguarded, full of something that looked like hope. "I wanted to thank you," Emma continued, stepping into the barn. Her limp seemed more pronounced suddenly, or maybe she was just more aware of it. "For everything you have done. The ranch looks better than it has in years. It was no trouble." Yates set down the brush and reached for his shirt, but Emma stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Wait." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "I need to say this before I lose my nerve. You have been here for 2 weeks, and in those 2 weeks, you have never once treated me like I am broken. You do not rush ahead or slow down in a way that makes me feel like a burden. You just walk with me. Do you know how rare that is?" Yates' blue eyes were steady on hers. "You are not broken, Emma. You are just healing in your own way." "My leg healed wrong," she said, the old bitterness creeping into her voice. "It will never be right again." "Maybe." Yates reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "But the rest of you is just fine. Better than fine. You are the strongest person I have met in a long time." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "I do not feel strong. I feel tired and lonely, and like I am fighting a battle I cannot win." "Then let me fight it with you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Emma searched his face, looking for pity or obligation, but all she saw was sincerity and something deeper, something that made her chest tight and her breath shallow. "Why?" she whispered. "Because somewhere between fixing your roof and mending your fences, I fell in love with you," Yates said simply. "I did not plan it. I did not expect it. But there it is. I love the way you face each day like it is a challenge you are determined to conquer. I love the way you sing when you think no one is listening. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you limp across your land like you own every inch of it, because you do. I love you, Emma Sullivan, and if you will have me, I would like to stay." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to refuse, to protect herself from the possibility of loss. She had already lost so much. Her mother, her father, the easy way she had once moved through the world. But another part of her, the part that had been growing stronger over the past 2 weeks, knew that refusing Yates would be its own kind of loss, maybe the worst kind. "I am afraid," she admitted. "So am I." Yates smiled just a little. "But I figure we can be afraid together." Emma laughed. The sound startled out of her, and then Yates was kissing her. His lips were warm and sure, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. Emma kissed him back, pouring all her loneliness and hope and fear into it, and when they finally pulled apart, she was breathing hard and her heart was pounding. "Stay," she said. "Please stay." "I am not going anywhere," Yates promised. They stood there in the barn, holding each other as the afternoon faded into evening, and for the first time in 3 years, Emma Sullivan did not feel alone. The next morning, they rode into El Dorado together to register Yates as a partner in the Sullivan Ranch. The town clerk, a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, looked skeptical but processed the paperwork without comment. As they left the office, Emma noticed people staring, but this time the stares felt different. Let them look, she thought. Let them wonder. She had found something rare and precious, and she was not going to let it go because of what others might think. But there was still the matter of the horse thieves. Yates had been hired to do a job, and he was not the kind of man to walk away from an obligation. He spent the next several days asking questions, following leads, tracking the gang's movements across the county. Emma helped when she could, her knowledge of the local ranches and their owners proving invaluable. It was Emma who made the connection that broke the case wide open. She was going over the list of ranches that had been hit when she noticed a pattern Yates had missed. "Look at this," she said, spreading the papers across the kitchen table. "Every ranch that was hit is owned by someone who bought their land after the war. The old families, the ones who have been here for generations, they have not been touched." Yates studied the list, his mind working. Someone with a grudge against the new settlers, or someone who thinks the land should still belong to them. Emma tapped one of the names. The Morrison place. That used to belong to the Carver family before they lost it for back taxes. And the Henderson Ranch, that was Carver land too. Who are the Carvers, old family? They used to own half the county before the war. The patriarch, Thomas Carver, died fighting for the Confederacy. His sons came back to find the land had been sold off. They have been bitter about it ever since. Emma looked up at Yates. Bitter enough to steal, maybe. It took 3 more days of careful investigation. But Yates finally caught the Carver brothers red-handed, trying to steal horses from a ranch 20 miles south of El Dorado. There was a brief confrontation, guns drawn and hard words exchanged, but in the end the brothers surrendered without a fight. They were tired, Yates realized. Tired of running, tired of fighting a war that had ended more than a decade ago, tired of holding on to anger that was eating them alive. The Cattlemen's Association paid Yates his fee, and he split it with Emma, ignoring her protests. "Partners share everything," he said firmly. "That is how it works." With the extra money, they were able to hire help for the ranch. 2 young men from town who needed work and were not put off by Emma's limp or the ranch's run-down condition. Slowly, the Sullivan place began to thrive again. The fields were properly tended, the cattle fattened, the buildings repaired and painted. Emma began to look less tired, the lines around her eyes easing as the weight of doing everything alone lifted from her shoulders. In September, as the leaves began to turn and the air took on a crisp edge, Yates asked Emma to marry him. He did it in the evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. There was no fancy speech, no elaborate proposal. He simply took her hand and said, "Marry me, Emma. Let me spend the rest of my life walking beside you." Emma said yes without hesitation. They were married in October in the small church in El Dorado with half the town in attendance. Emma wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk for all these years, and Yates wore his one good suit. The preacher spoke about love and commitment and the sanctity of marriage, but Emma barely heard him. She was too focused on Yates, on the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world, on the way his hand held her steady and sure. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her in front of everyone, a long, slow kiss that made the congregation murmur and Emma's cheeks flush. They walked out of the church together, and Yates matched his pace to hers, just as he always did, just as Emma knew he always would. The first year of their marriage was not easy. The ranch demanded constant attention, and there were setbacks and difficulties that tested them both. A drought in the summer of 1877 killed half their corn crop. Wolves got into the cattle in the winter, killing 2 calves before Yates managed to shoot the pack leader. Emma caught influenza in the spring and was bedridden for 2 weeks, her fever so high that Yates sat up with her every night, bathing her face with cool water and praying she would recover. But there were good times too. Long evenings on the porch, talking about their day and making plans for the future. Mornings when they woke tangled together in their bed, the world outside quiet and still. Moments of laughter when one of the horses did something ridiculous, or when Yates tried to cook and nearly burned down the kitchen. Quiet moments in the barn or the fields when they simply worked side by side, comfortable in each other's presence. Emma found that being married to Yates was nothing like she had imagined marriage would be. He did not try to take over the ranch or make decisions without consulting her. He treated her as an equal partner, valuing her opinions and deferring to her knowledge of the land. When her leg pained her, he rubbed it with liniment without her having to ask. When she woke from nightmares about the night her father died, he held her until the shaking stopped. He was patient and kind and steady, a rock she could lean on without fear of being judged weak. And Yates found in Emma something he had not known he was looking for. She challenged him, pushed him to be better, to think harder, to care more deeply. She made him laugh with her dry observations about their neighbors. She made him feel needed but not burdened, wanted but not caged. She saw past the walls he had built around his heart and loved what she found inside, scars and all. In the spring of 1878, Emma realized she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening as they were washing dishes, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush. "I think I am going to have a baby. I am almost certain. I have missed my courses for 2 months now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." Yates dropped the plate he was holding. It shattered on the floor, but he did not seem to notice. He was staring at Emma, his face cycling through surprise, joy, and fear in rapid succession. "A baby, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Emma asked, suddenly uncertain. Yates laughed, the sound breaking from him like a dam bursting, and swept her into his arms. "Happy? Emma, I am terrified and thrilled and happier than I have ever been in my entire life. We are going to have a baby." He spun her around carefully, mindful of her leg, and Emma laughed with him, her own fear dissolving in the face of his joy. They would figure it out, she thought. They always did. The pregnancy was difficult. Emma's leg, already a source of pain and difficulty, protested the extra weight. By her 6th month, she could barely walk more than a few steps without needing to sit down. Yates hired a woman from town, Mrs. Patterson, to help with the housework and cooking. He took over most of the ranch work himself, though Emma still insisted on going over the books and making decisions about which cattle to sell and when to plant the crops. The baby came in November, a month early, and after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Yates paced outside the bedroom, listening to Emma's cries and the low murmur of Mrs. Patterson's voice, feeling helpless and afraid. When the crying finally stopped and silence fell, he thought his heart would stop too. But then he heard it, a thin wail that grew stronger and louder, the unmistakable sound of a newborn baby. Mrs. Patterson opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Lawson, a healthy baby boy, and your wife is doing well." Yates pushed past her into the room. Emma was lying in their bed, pale and exhausted, her hair damp with sweat. But she was smiling, and in her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. Yates approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. His tiny fists waved in the air, and his mouth opened in another wail. He was the most beautiful thing Yates had ever seen. "You want to hold him?" Emma asked softly. Yates nodded, not trusting his voice, and carefully took the baby from Emma's arms. The weight of him was almost nothing, but it felt like everything. This small person, this tiny life, was his son, his and Emma's, a family. "What should we name him?" Emma asked. Yates had been thinking about this for months. "What about John, after my brother?" Emma's eyes softened. "John Lawson, I like it. John Thomas Lawson, after your brother and my father." "John Thomas Lawson," Yates repeated, testing the name. It felt right. He looked down at the baby, at John, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "Hello, John. Welcome to the world." The years that followed were full and busy. John grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He learned to walk at 10 months, running before he could barely toddle, and he kept Emma and Yates constantly on their toes. The ranch continued to prosper, growing larger as they bought up adjacent parcels of land. They hired more help, building a bunkhouse for the ranch hands and expanding the barn to hold more cattle. In 1881, Emma gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Yates' mother. Sarah was quieter than John, more thoughtful, with Yates' blue eyes and Emma's dark hair. She followed her mother everywhere, learning to cook and sew and manage the household accounts. But she also learned to ride and rope cattle, refusing to be left behind when John and Yates went out to work the ranch. Emma's leg never got better, but she learned to live with it in new ways. Some days were harder than others, days when the old pain flared up and walking was agony. But she had Yates beside her, and their children, and a life that she had built with her own two hands. The limp that had once seemed like a curse became just another part of who she was, no more defining than the color of her eyes or the sound of her laugh. Yates never stopped slowing his pace to match hers. Even after 15 years of marriage, even when they were old and gray and their children had children of their own, he walked beside her with the same easy rhythm they had found that first day in El Dorado. It was such a small thing, just matching her pace, but to Emma it meant everything. It meant he saw her, truly saw her, not as someone broken or less than, but as someone worth walking beside. On their 20th anniversary, Yates surprised Emma with a gift. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset as they had done so many times before, when he handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Emma opened it carefully, revealing a leather-bound book with blank pages. "What is this?" she asked. "I thought you might like to write down our story," Yates said, "for the children and grandchildren so they know how we found each other." Emma ran her hand over the smooth leather, tears pricking her eyes. "That is a beautiful idea. We have had a good life," Yates said, taking her hand. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. I want them to know that. I want them to know that the best thing I ever did was slow down enough to walk beside you." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beating of his heart. "I love you, Yates Lawson." "I love you too, Emma Lawson. Always have. Always will." They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Kansas sky in brilliant shades of red and orange and purple. The ranch stretched out around them, the land they had built together, filled with cattle and horses and fields of wheat. In the house behind them, they could hear their children laughing, John arguing with Sarah about something inconsequential, the sound of family and life and home. Emma thought back to that day in El Dorado when Yates had first slowed his walk to match her pace, when he had seen past her limp to the person underneath. She thought about all the years since then, the struggles and triumphs, the sorrows and joys. It had not been easy. Life never was. But it had been worth it. Every moment, every step had been worth it. She had been broken, yes. Her leg had healed all wrong, would never be right again. But somewhere along the way, the rest of her had healed just fine. She had found love and partnership and a place to belong. She had built a life that mattered, raised children who would carry on after she was gone, created something lasting and good. And through it all, Yates had been beside her, matching her pace, never rushing ahead or lagging behind. Just walking with her, step by step, through whatever came their way. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Emma squeezed Yates' hand and smiled. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not perfection, not a life without struggle or pain, but this. A hand to hold, a partner to walk beside, and the knowledge that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of growing things and the distant lowing of cattle. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called out, its voice echoing across the prairie. Emma closed her eyes and breathed it all in, this moment, this life, this love that had taken her broken pieces and made them whole again. Years continued to pass with the reliable rhythm of the seasons. John grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with a good head for business and a gentle way with horses. At 20, he married a girl from town, a pretty blonde named Mary who loved the ranch almost as much as he did. They built a house on the eastern section of the property, close enough to visit often but far enough to have their own space. Within a year, they gave Emma and Yates their first grandchild, a boy they named Yates after his grandfather. Sarah took longer to settle down. She had inherited her mother's independent streak and her father's wanderlust. She taught school in El Dorado for several years, earning respect for her patience with difficult students and her innovative teaching methods. When she finally married at 25, it was to a lawyer from Wichita who had come to El Dorado on business and fallen in love with the sharp-tongued schoolteacher who had strong opinions about everything from land rights to literature. By 1895, the Sullivan Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the county. What had started as a struggling property run by a young woman alone had grown into a thriving enterprise. The main house had been expanded and renovated, the barn rebuilt twice to accommodate their growing herd. They employed 15 hands year-round, more during cattle drives and harvest season. But despite their success, Emma and Yates never forgot where they had started. They gave generously to families struggling to make ends meet, offering jobs to young men who needed a chance, and quietly paying medical bills for neighbors who could not afford the doctor. Emma served on the school board, fighting to ensure that all children had access to education, regardless of their family's wealth. Yates trained young men in tracking and ranch management, passing on skills that might otherwise be lost. On Emma's 45th birthday, the town of El Dorado threw a celebration in their honor. The mayor gave a speech about their contributions to the community, and the schoolchildren sang songs. There was dancing in the street and a feast that lasted until well after dark. Emma stood beside Yates, watching the festivities, feeling both proud and slightly overwhelmed. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked him quietly. "When you first helped me carry my packages from the general store." Yates smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way she loved. "I imagined something, maybe not all this. But I knew you were special from the moment I saw you. I knew I wanted to know you better. Because of my limp," Emma teased. "Despite your limp, because of you." Yates turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Emma, you are the strongest, most capable, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Your leg does not define you, it never has. You define you." After all these years, he could still make her blush. "You are a charmer, Yates Lawson. Only for you." He offered her his arm. "Dance with me." Emma hesitated. She could dance, had danced at their wedding and at their children's weddings, but it was always difficult. Her leg did not bend the way it should, and she had to rely heavily on her partner to keep her balance. It made her self-conscious, aware of people watching and making allowances. But this was Yates, who had spent 20 years matching her pace without complaint. She slipped her hand through his arm and let him lead her to the makeshift dance floor. The fiddler struck up a waltz, and Yates pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers gently. They moved slowly, Yates leading her through the steps at a pace she could manage. His arms were strong and sure, supporting her when her leg threatened to give out, guiding her through the turns with practiced ease. Emma closed her eyes and let herself relax into his embrace, trusting him completely. When the song ended, the crowd applauded, but Emma barely heard them. She was looking up at Yates, at the love and pride in his eyes, and feeling grateful beyond words. This man, this good and patient and wonderful man, had chosen her, had continued choosing her every single day for 2 decades, had built a life with her that was richer and fuller than she had ever dreamed possible. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For everything. For slowing down. For seeing me. For loving me." Yates kissed her forehead gently. "Emma Lawson, loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." As they grew older, the physical challenges became more pronounced. Emma's leg, which had always caused her pain, began to deteriorate further. Some mornings, she could barely put weight on it. The cold winters were especially hard, the old injury aching deep in the bone. But Emma never complained, and Yates never made her feel like a burden. He simply adjusted, helping her when she needed it, giving her space when she did not. In 1898, when Emma was 48 and Yates was 52, they decided it was time to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. John was more than capable of running things, with Mary's able assistance and a crew of experienced hands. Emma and Yates moved into a smaller house they built on a hill overlooking the ranch, a place where they could watch the sun rise and set, where they could see their life's work spread out below them. They spent their days reading, talking, and taking slow walks around the property. Yates carved wooden toys for their growing collection of grandchildren. Emma finally had time to pursue her love of reading, going through book after book that she ordered from catalogs or borrowed from the lending library in town. They hosted Sunday dinners for the family, the house filled with children and laughter and the comfortable chaos of multiple generations under one roof. On quiet evenings, Emma would write in the journal Yates had given her years ago. She wrote about their courtship, about the early struggles of the ranch, about the births of their children and the triumphs and sorrows that had shaped their lives. She wrote about the night her leg was broken and her father was killed, about the pain and fear and anger she had carried. And she wrote about Yates, about his kindness and patience, about the way he had seen past her injury to the person underneath. "What are you writing?" Yates asked one evening, looking up from his whittling. "About us," Emma said. "About how we met. I want the grandchildren to know the whole story, not just the parts they have heard in bits and pieces. Are you writing about the day I helped you carry your packages?" "That is where it starts, yes." Emma smiled. "The day you slowed down for me." Yates set aside his carving and came to sit beside her. "Best decision I ever made. Slowing down, I mean. If I had just rushed past like everyone else, I would have missed everything. Missed you. Missed this life. I would have kept drifting from town to town, never settling, never finding a home." "Do you ever regret it, staying here instead of moving on?" "Not once. Not for a single moment." Yates took her hand, his thumb rubbing gently over her knuckles. "You are my home, Emma. You always have been." They sat together in comfortable silence, the weight of their years together settling around them like a warm blanket. Outside, the Kansas wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The ranch lights twinkled below them, signs of life and activity, the continuation of what they had built. In the spring of 1902, Emma became very ill. What started as a cold developed into pneumonia, her lungs filling with fluid until every breath was a struggle. The doctor came from town and did what he could, but at 52, Emma's body was worn from years of hard work and chronic pain. Yates sat by her bedside day and night, refusing to leave even when their children begged him to rest. "You need to take care of yourself," John said gently, his hand on his father's shoulder. "I am taking care of what matters," Yates replied, not taking his eyes off Emma's pale face. For 3 weeks, Emma hovered between life and death, her fever raging and her breathing labored. Yates held her hand through it all, talking to her even when she was too delirious to respond, telling her stories about their life together, about the grandchildren she needed to get better to see, about the plans they still had for the future. And slowly, impossibly, Emma began to improve. The fever broke. Her breathing eased. Color returned to her cheeks. The doctor called it a miracle, shaking his head in amazement. Emma called it stubbornness. Yates called it love. "I was not ready to leave you yet," Emma said weakly, when she was finally strong enough to speak. "Good," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I was not ready to let you go." Emma recovered slowly, her body needing months to regain its strength. But by summer, she was well enough to sit on the porch again, to take short walks with Yates supporting her arm, to hold her newest grandchild and marvel at the perfect tiny fingers and toes. The experience had shaken them both, reminded them of how precious and fragile life was. "We need to make the most of the time we have," Emma said one evening as they watched the sunset. "We always have," Yates replied. "No, I mean really make the most of it. No more putting things off. No more waiting for the right time. If we want to do something, we should do it now." So they did. They took a trip to San Francisco, something they had always talked about but never done. They rode the cable cars and saw the ocean and ate in restaurants where they felt out of place but laughed about it anyway. They visited Sarah and her family in Wichita, spending a month in the city, despite preferring the open spaces of the ranch. They threw a party for their 30th wedding anniversary, inviting everyone they knew and dancing until midnight. And through it all, Yates continued to match his pace to Emma's. Even when his own joints began to ache with age, even when his back protested the long days of work, he walked beside her at her speed, never rushing, never impatient. By 1910, they were both in their 60s, officially retired from ranch work, content to let the younger generation take over. They had seen Kansas transform from wild frontier to settled farmland, had witnessed the arrival of the railroad, and the telephone and automobiles that sputtered down streets that had once known only horses and wagons. The world was changing, moving faster, but Emma and Yates moved at their own pace, unhurried and unworried. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family. Their children, now middle-aged with gray in their own hair. Their grandchildren, ranging from infants to young adults starting families of their own. And even a few great-grandchildren, toddlers who called them Nana and Papa and climbed into their laps to hear stories about the old days. "Tell us how you met," one of the granddaughters begged, a girl of 15 with Emma's green eyes and Yates' stubborn chin. Emma and Yates exchanged a look, a whole conversation passing between them in that glance. Then Emma began to speak, her voice still strong despite her years. "I was walking out of the general store," she said, "my arms full of packages and my leg hurting something fierce. I had broken my leg years before, and it had healed all wrong, so I walked with a limp. Still do. Most people either rushed past me or made a big show of being patient. But your great-grandfather, he was different." I slowed down, Yates continued, picking up the story. "I matched her pace. It seemed like the natural thing to do. She needed help and I wanted to give it." "Was it love at first sight?" another grandchild asked, a romantic at heart. Emma laughed. "Not exactly, but it was something. I think I knew even then that he was someone special, someone who saw me, really saw me, not just my limp. And I knew she was someone worth slowing down for," Yates added, "worth changing my plans for, worth building a life with." The children and grandchildren listened, enraptured as Emma and Yates told their story. The struggles and triumphs, the love and partnership, the life they had built together on the Kansas prairie. It was a good story, Emma thought. A true story, a story worth telling. As the party wound down and the family began to head home, Emma and Yates stood on the porch of their little house, watching the sun set one more time. The sky was streaked with gold and pink, the air warm and fragrant with the smell of growing things. Below them, the ranch sprawled out prosperous and thriving, a legacy they would leave behind. "You think they understand?" Emma asked quietly. "The grandchildren. Do they understand what we have tried to teach them?" "I think so," Yates said. "Or they will eventually." Life has a way of teaching the important lessons. And what is the most important lesson? Yates turned to look at her, his blue eyes still as clear and bright as they had been 40 years ago. That love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone worth slowing down for. Someone whose pace you are willing to match, even when it is not easy, even when the world is rushing past and telling you to hurry up. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, he could still make her cry with his simple wisdom. "I love you, Yates Lawson." "I love you too, Emma Lawson. From that first day in El Dorado until my last breath, I will always love you." They stood together, hand in hand, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge. The Kansas wind whispered around them, carrying the sounds of their ranch, their family, their life. It had been a good life, Emma thought. Not perfect, not easy, but good. Full of love and laughter and hard work and purpose. Her leg still hurt. It would always hurt. But it did not matter, had never really mattered, because she had found someone who walked beside her anyway. Someone who had slowed his pace to match hers and never once complained about it. Someone who had seen past the broken parts to the whole person underneath. And that, Emma thought as Yates' arm came around her waist and she leaned into his solid warmth, was all anyone could really ask for. To be seen, to be loved, to find someone willing to walk beside you at your pace through whatever life brought your way. She had been blessed with that. They both had. The stars grew brighter as the darkness deepened, a vast canopy of light stretching out over the Kansas prairie, over the ranch they had built, over the family they had raised, over the love they had nurtured through 4 decades of joy and sorrow. And beneath those stars, Emma and Yates Lawson stood together, still walking side by side, still matching each other's pace, still choosing each other, day after day after day, the way they always had and always would, until the very end.